Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So for this episode, I've got a question for you. Well, actually, two questions. The first question is, do you have $10? And the second question is, well, do you want to lose your friends? And if the answer to each of those questions is yes, well, do I have the episode and the deck for you? Because on this episode, I'm going to prove to you that it only takes $10 to upset your friends to the amount where, well, they might not want to play Magic with you ever again. So how are we going to be so wisely spending our money? Well, let's jump into it to find out. Now, the commander that I chose to helm this deck is, well, none other than Zurgo Helm Smasher. Zurgo is a 7/2 Orc Warrior with haste that costs 2 red, white, black. Zurgo is going to attack each combat if able, and Zurgo has Indestructible as long as it's your turn, and whenever a creature dealt damage by Zurgo this turn dies, put a +1 counter on Zurgo Helm Smasher. So Zurgo was chosen, well, for a couple of reasons. This is a very aggressive commander that can take out opponents very quickly, if he can get through. Again, Zurgo is a 7/2 with haste that has to attack each combat if able, and we want to attack with him because, well, if we hit an opponent 3 times with him with that 7 damage again, 3 times 7, 21, that opponent's gone. But the main thing that makes Zurgo perfect for this deck is that Zurgo is going to be indestructible on our turn. And well, because of that, there are some pretty mean things that we can do. Over and over and over again, to the point where we're going to be losing our friends. Now, I've talked before on a couple of episodes about Commander's unwritten rules, and well, this deck just kind of, well, it's not really a defined rule, but it's kind of more like a don't do that kind of thing. And it's actually one that I learned, well, pretty early in my Commander career when I made this mistake with a certain deck. Because although sometimes there might be an optimal way to build a deck, that doesn't mean that, you know, it's still a very accepted way of building a deck and playing against that deck for certain playgroups. Though decks are expected to have certain types of cards in them, like, you know, ramp, card advantage, targeted removal, and yes, even wraths. With wraths specifically, though, there is kind of an upper threshold, let's just say, of the number of wraths that players are okay with playing against in a deck. Now, what exactly that number is that many players are okay playing against, well, I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, you know, it varies from player to player. I would say probably on average, maybe like 7, 8, 9 is probably on the high end of the amount of wraths that a lot of players are okay with playing against. But what the number certainly isn't is like 30, which is what this deck is. That's right, your opponents better enjoy cleaning up their boards because, well, we're going to be casting wrath after wrath after wrath, and everything's going to be going away, well, except for Zurgo. Zurgo's going to stick around and smack our opponents. Again, who needs to actually, you know, help Zurgo become unblockable or, you know, give it, you know, flying or whatnot when your opponents don't have any creatures who actually even block it because you just keep wiping the board over and over again. And yeah, even with just a $10 budget, there are still plenty of fantastic wraths that we can, well, use to do just that. So to start things off, we even have access to a 4-mana Wrath that can help us with Shadow to the Sky. It says, each player who controls a creature with power 4 or greater draws a card, then destroy all creatures. So yes, this might ever so slightly help out our opponents by drawing them a card. It's definitely going to be drawing us a card again because we've got a 7/2 in play, and it's going to be wiping the board. And again, when it comes to board wipes, this is just the beginning, because we also have access to other ones like Rout, Planar Outburst, and Winds of Wrath. Again, the main thing that we really care about is that these just wipe the board. Some of them do have some kind of little extra benefits, and we'll talk about some of those really quickly, but the main thing is, hey, just cast it, wipe the board, and let your commander do the rest. Now, Rout actually has some extra flexibility that if you pay 2 more, you can cast it at instant speed, but do keep in mind again that Zergo is only indestructible on our turn, so casting this at instant speed on an opponent's turn might not be the best idea. And then Planar Outburst is actually going to blow up all non-land creatures, which again is pretty much all creatures, basically 100% of the time, and we can also awaken 4 for 5 white. And then Winds of Wrath says destroy all creatures that aren't enchanted, they can't be regenerated. Typically, creatures aren't going to be enchanted, and unfortunately, if they are, well, those get to stick around until we Wrath again. You know, with something like Phyrexian Rebirth, or Deadly Tempest, or Extinguish All Hope. Phyrexian Rebirth is going to wipe the board of all the creatures and give us an XX creature for, every single creature destroyed this way. And Deadly Tempest is going to blow up all creatures as well and make each player lose life equal to the number of creatures they controlled that were destroyed this way. So our opponents are going to lose, well, probably a decent amount of life, and we basically won't lose anything. And then Extinguish All Hope will destroy all non-enchantment creatures, so if your friend's got an enchantment deck, they have a bunch of enchantment creatures, good for them. We're going to have to board wipe again to take out their creatures another time. And then at 7 mana, we've got Fate of Retribution, Hour of Reckoning, and Necromantic Selection. Fate of Retribution says destroy all creatures and planeswalkers. If it's your turn, scry 2. And again, we're basically only going to be casting this on our turn because again, we want to keep Zergo in play. Hour of Reckoning is actually going to destroy all non-token creatures, so again, kind of like Extinguish All Hope. This one can let some things kind of slide through the cracks, but that's okay because of all the number of wraths that we have. And then Necromantic Selection can actually help us out even more than a regular wrath. It says destroy all creatures, then return a creature card, put into a graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. It's a black zombie to shoots other colors and types. Exile Necromantic Selection. Basically, wipe out the board and steal your opponent's best creature. We can also wipe the board and get some more things in return with Martial Coup. It says create X/1/1 white soldier creature tokens, but if X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. And then a card like Selfless Glyph Weaver can actually help us out in multiple ways. It says exile it, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So if we want this as an extra added layer of protection for our commander on our opponent's turns, great, we can utilize that. Or, on the backside, of course, we've got yet another board wipe with Deadly Vanity. It says choose a creature planeswalker and destroy all other creatures and planeswalkers. And then we've got some cheaper board wipes that can either take it all big or small creatures with Citywide Bust and Ritual of Suit. Citywide Bust is going to destroy all creatures with toughness 4 or greater. And Ritual of Suit is going to destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less. So ironically, neither of these actually really hit our commander anyways, but even if they did, our commander is going to be fine because of that indestructibility. Next up, we actually have some creatures that can help us wipe the board as well with Magus of the Balance, Magus of the Disc, and Deathbringer Regent. Magus of the Balance has pay 4, a white, and tap, sacrifice it. Each player chooses a number of lands they control equal to the number of lands controlled by the player controls the fewest, then sacrifices the rest. Players discard cards and sacrifice creatures the same way. Basically, it balances things. That's fair, right? No, not so much. Okay, let's move on. And then Magus of the Disc enters the battlefield tapped, and we can pay 1 and tap to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. Moving on, Deathbringer Regent has when enters the battlefield, if you cast from your hand and there are 5 or more other creatures on the battlefield, destroy all other creatures. So again, on top of keeping our commander in play, well now we've got a 5/6 flying dragon, which is lovely. And speaking of creature-based board wipes, we also have some creatures that have damage-based board wipes with things like Chaos Maw, Crater Hellion, and Pyrrha the Volatile. Chaos Maw has when it enters the battlefield, deals 3 damage to each other creature. And then Crater Hellion also has an ETB, but it's going to be 4 damage to each other creature, and it's got an echo cost, which, hey, if we want to keep it around, we can. Speaking of which, there's Pyrrha the Volatile, a 7/7 flying lifelink elder dragon that has at the beginning of your upkeep sacrifice unless you pay red, white, black, and when it dies, deals 7 damage to each non-legendary creature. So yeah, a big threat in itself, and also a big board wipe on its own too. And of course, we've got other damage-based board wipes with things like Breath of Dargaz, Deafening Clarion, and Storm's Wrath. Breath of Dargaz has Kicker 2. If we kicked it, it's going to deal 4 damage to each creature without flying and each player. And then Deafening Clarion is going to deal 3 damage to each other creature, or we can choose to give our creatures lifelink until end of turn if we really need to. Moving on, there's Storm's Wrath, which for 4 mana, we get 4 damage to each creature and each planeswalker as well. But also at 4 mana, we've got even more damage potential with Chain Reaction. It's going to deal X damage to each creature where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. And then Insight Rebellion says, for each player, Insight Rebellion deals damage to that player and each creature that player controls equal to the number of creatures they control. So have fun, token decks, because you're going to be taking a ton of damage. And speaking of a ton of damage, Volcanic Vision is going to let us bring back an instant sorcery from our graveyard back to our hand, and then based on that card's mana value, it's going to deal damage to each creature our opponents control. So we get to recur what is probably going to be one of our other Wraths, which just also wraths the board when we cast this. So have fun. And speaking of fun, of course, there's Magma Quake, which is going to let us deal X damage to each creature without flying and each Planeswalker. Now, you might be thinking we've got to be done with board wipes, but, well, if we were, we might still have friends. And you know what? We need to make sure that we don't have friends, because again, that is the purpose of this episode. So, of course, there is one card that is essentially going to be guaranteed to make us lose all of our friends, and that card is, of course, the number one card out of our 99, the Golden Pig of this deck. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Bearer of the Heavens. Bearer of the Heavens is a 10/10 giant for 7 and a red, and it has, when it dies, destroy all permanents at the beginning of the next end step. So yeah, this is a massive creature, but we really don't care too much about it being a 10/10 because we care about its massive death trigger. When this dies, everything goes bye-bye, including lands. Well, again, though, what you want to have happen is this to go off on your turn because Zurgo needs to be indestructible. And when that happens, Zurgo still sticks around, so everything is gone but Zurgo, who then can just swing freely to take all your opponents out. So yeah, again, when playing this, please be careful for multiple reasons. Again, number one, if you don't want to lose your friends, just don't play this. Okay, just don't. But if you're okay with that, well then, be careful when you play this, because if you don't have a way to actually destroy Bear of the Heavens, and it gets dealt with on an opponent's turn, well, Zurgo is going away as well, and you're going to be pretty sad. And actually, everyone will be pretty sad, or probably more so really mad at you, because that game is going to take forever since you just wiped out everything. Regardless, because this has the highest potential of losing your friends, and that's the point of this episode, this is most definitely the Golden Pig of the deck. Anyways, next up we've got Planar Cleansing and Devastating Mastery, and yeah, that's a good word for it. Both of these cards are incredibly devastating. Planar Cleansing is going to destroy all non-land permanents, and Devastating Mastery is going to do the exact same thing, but we can pay a cheaper cost for that effect. Though if we do, an opponent gets to bounce 2 non-land permanents they control back to their hand. But of course, we're also going to be running some target removal as well to deal with all those pesky artifacts and enchantments that most of our Wraths aren't going to touch. So we've got things like Revoke Existence, Cast Out, Banishing Light, Return to Dust, Disenchant, Break Ties, Seal of Cleansing, and Expose to Daylight. So yeah, if you like controlling the board on top of losing your friends, or should I say while losing your friends, have fun with that. But how are we actually going to get to all of these lovely cards? We can actually be generous and help out, one of our friends while helping ourselves by giving them Humbled Effector. We can tap it to draw 2 cards, and then target opponent gains control of it. Activate only during your turn. So, you tap the Humbled Effector, we draw our cards, and give it to opponent. Oh, what's this? Oh no, I drew a Wrath. Well, I kind of gotta use that now. So, goodbye, Humbled Effector. I am so sorry, friend, that you didn't get to actually utilize it to draw any cards. And of course, we can also utilize our opponent's hands, by saying, hey, friend over there, you've got a lot of cards in your hand. I don't really have that many, so I'm going to play Sandstone Oracle and draw up to the amount that you have. And of course, we can keep drawing into more and more Wraths with something like Loreseeker Stone. It has to pay 3 and tap, draw 3 cards. Its ability costs 1 more, and activate for each card in your hand. Regardless, of course, we're also going to be running your more typical draw spells, or I should say typical for this budget, with cards like Tormenting Voice, Thrilling Discovery, Thrill Possibility, Crushing Disappointment, Secret Rendezvous, Forbidding Fruit, Painful Lesson, Funeral Rites, and Blood Pact. That was a mouthful. And speaking of a mouthful, also let's quickly go through the mana rocks for this deck. We've got cards like Component Pouch, Unstable Obelisk, Rakdos Locket, Boros Locket, Paradise Plume, Spinning Wheel, Spectral Searchlight, Orzhov Locket, Letter of Acceptance, and Altar of the Pantheon. Again, at this budget, we are okay with going just a bit slower, especially since we can slow everyone else down by just nuking the board over and over again. So because of that, and because mana fixing is pretty important for some of the Wraths in this deck, we're also going to be utilizing cards like Prophetic Prism and Golden Egg. Prophetic Prism has, when it enters battlefield, draw a card, and by paying 1 and tapping it, we add 1 mana of any color. And then Golden Egg can also filter a mana, but we have to sacrifice it to do so, and it also draws a card when it comes into play. Regardless, now that we talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. And like I mentioned at the start of this episode, and as you saw in the thumbnail, the description, and the title as well, this is a $10 deck. Although, okay, technically, fine. The estimated cost is $9.92. So you get an extra 8 cents in savings. Good for you. Now, keep in mind that that cost actually doesn't include the cost of basic lands, but if you already have those, great, there's some extra savings there. And speaking of extra savings, you very well might get some more savings if you buy this deck on TCG Player and utilize heavily played and damage cards, because those cards need a home too. Though, do keep in mind that this cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.